Hello and welcome to episode 7 of Underscored. I'm Stephen Kent and this podcast is brought to you by Young Voices. It's nice to be back. It's been one holiday after the other. That tends to be the usual sort of chaos and disjointed sort of scheduling that comes with November and December. But we are back. It's a new year. It is Friday, January 4th, 2019. Sorry to have missed you last week. I think we'll be back into a regular flow from here on out. We're back this week again with more discussions from the world of politics and policy, and I'm happy to be joined by my guest, Young Voices contributor and writer, Daniel DiMartino. Daniel recently wrote a piece in RealClearPolicy titled, "Who Will Build the Roads? States, If We Let Them." Daniel, welcome onto the program.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely. You are coming to us from Spain. It's very nice of you to take some time while you are abroad, obviously in a lovely place, I'm sure, and chat with us here on Underscored.
Yeah, definitely. This article was very interesting. I think that transportation is one of those misunderstood topics, and everyone agrees that the roads are bad, and everyone wants to fix them, but nobody knows how.
Yeah, I mean, we all like roads. How are the roads in Spain? What brings you out across the Atlantic?
Well, actually, they're pretty good. The problem is that they really just spend a lot more money, and their gas taxes are just very, very high. Actually, the revenue they get from the gas taxes here in Spain and in other European countries is much more than they need for the roads, and the politicians just pocket it for other programs. So it's definitely worse.
Classic. That sounds like politics at its best. So this piece that you wrote in Real Clear Policy is about the roads. This is kind of a running joke in the world of libertarian thought, and the left likes to heckle us a lot, and we like to heckle them back about what if the government didn't exist? How would we have roads? It seems as if roads are like the great crowning achievement of bureaucracy and government, and if we did not somehow pay high taxes that we do, or pay taxes at all, that just no void would be filled, or the void would not be filled by anyone interested in driving on concrete. The premise to this is that in the wake of like a Congressional Budget Office report that revealed that the federal highway system spending would face a 30% cut after 2021, Democrats and Republicans have sort of tried to bond together to resolve infrastructure shortfalls and gaps here in the United States. But there's no sign that is going to happen, Daniel. I mean, do you see sort of any real confluence of interests on the matter of highway spending?
Well, I'm sure something will happen at least by September 30th, 2020, because that's the day that the Highway Trust Fund Authority expires, and that is just before the 2020 presidential election. And Trump will definitely have a really, really high incentive to have something approved, because otherwise there will really be chaos in the Department of Transportation just before the presidential election.
Just kind of right off the
Yeah.
bat, do you even agree with the premise that we do have a problem with infrastructure in this country, that the roads are deteriorating, that bridges need to be overhauled? Do you sort of see the problem that critics of these sort of failures to fund highways see themselves?
So I think there is a problem with a lot of local roads. I don't think there is a problem with federal highways that people are making out, or with the airports that people are saying that the U.S. has a third world infrastructure. That is just a completely false premise. People who say that probably have never been to the third world and seen the third world infrastructure.
Yeah, usually there's not concrete to begin with.
Yeah. I've seen how airports are in other countries, not just like Venezuela, where I'm from, but like Latin American countries like Panama, and they're definitely not like the United States. Um, but yeah, I mean, there's many things that can be done for the highway system and for roads. Cities like LA have a lot of traffic. That is definitely an infrastructure problem, bad design. But these are fundamentally local problems. It's not like the president is going to make a program because LA has a lot of traffic. No, that's something for the state of California and the counties to
I think
figure
that's
out.
Elon Musk's problem now at this
Yeah,
point, right? He's just
you're
going to
right.
build the tunnels and just zip everybody around. Yeah, well, President Trump has endorsed a gas tax increase to pay for a $200 billion infrastructure plan. What does a gas tax increase like that sort of look like in comparison to, you mentioned in Spain that there's, massive gas taxes there. I think they just sort of went through this sort of thing in France that, really kind of helped ignite a lot of frustrations and angst among the French people about taxes there. What does a gas tax in the United States look like that Donald Trump might actually support?
Well, what I can tell you is that his plan of his 200 billion plan, the one he actually laid out, not the 1 trillion claim or anything, it's not even the
Yeah.
roads. Like half of it goes to things about water or schools and other things that they consider to be infrastructure, which, under different definitions of free infrastructure, perhaps it is, but it's not the roads that we're thinking of. So probably if they increase the gas tax and if they implement this plan, it's not really going to go to the roads.
So where does it go?
That's the concern. I think that just like it happened throughout history, and that I write in my article, the Highway Trust Fund that was originally implemented to build something good, which was interstate highways, was then diverted to build
Yeah.
other things like mass transit, and now they have a mass transit account inside the Highway Trust Fund that is just being used to subsidize New York City's metro or LA's and San Francisco's high speed rail that they want to build and they never end up building.
More pet projects. Yeah, the Highway Trust Fund you mentioned is sort of started off in 1956, and it now has been bailed out by Congress with more than $140 billion in the last decade. This continues to happen, and analysts have noted that the federal gas tax hasn't been raised since 1993, while highway spending has increased due to inflation. So, is that you saying that there does need to be a federal gas tax, or that we're sort of really missing the point and should just scrap the whole thing?
What I'm proposing is a very sensible approach, I think. I think that the federal government, if it's going to have a role in transportation at all, it should limit itself to interstate highways. And I don't think that that's really controversial
Mm-hmm.
unless it is something that you tell to a congressman, because the congress people, they want to have their own pet projects funded by the trust fund, of course. Um, but the issue here is that
Uh
while
huh.
yes, highway trust fund revenues have been declining, adjusted for inflation, because the gas tax has not been raised at all, and highway use has increased. So increased spending is terrible, really, budgetary reasons wise. But the issue here is that the government is spending on things it shouldn't be spending. So why raise the tax if you can just cut unnecessary spending?
Yeah, I mean, cutting unnecessary spending seems nice, and I like the idea of focusing those federal dollars on federal roadways. But so, what happens with the non-interstate highways that we mentioned? There is deterioration going on in more local roads. Those kind of bypasses that get you to those highways. Belt lines around major cities that are not federal. What happens there, and how is that going to be resolved both politically and financially?
That's a good question, actually. There have been a few bills in Congress that have been introduced by senators like Ted Cruz and Mike Lee that would actually reduce the federal gas tax, and divert all the funds from the Highway Trust Fund just towards interstate roads. Everything else would be up for the states. So, given that the federal gas tax would be lower, the states could increase their own gas taxes or try to fund roads in any other way they please. Like, California might want to start taxing Uber like DC does right now. Even though I don't agree with that approach, it's their
Yeah.
choice as a state under their 10th Amendment. And if they want to fund roads that way, let them do it. And Texas can fund them in any other way. That way, states can compete for drivers, states can compete for people like they currently do with different tax systems. And they can compete with who has the best roads.
Yeah, I mean, God forbid we make more decisions based on the differences between the states and just sort of accept them. We do tend to, I think, in libertarian school of thought, like get really focused on trying to make every state perfect. Like when California does something kind of egregious or outrageous from a market perspective. We kind of like act as if it's some sort of offense on the rest of the country, but really, I mean, this is just sort of what Californians they've chosen, and we just sort of have to let them do that experiment and tell us if it works. Tell if it's working working out for you that well. These sort of national catch-all solutions are not what you want either. You want the states to have those differences. Do you think that part of the problem here is that I guess states and politicians in local state legislatures have gotten used to offloading this responsibility to the federal government and to their representatives in Congress, that there might actually be just so much reliance on them politically to make those tough choices that then roads will just
I think the
continue to
big thing
stagnate
here is
and
that
die
just like with
in those
Medicaid and
states.
other federal programs, the government is just giving away, the federal government is just giving away money to the states. The problem is that this money also comes with strings attached. And what are the state's legislators going to say? No, federal government, don't give me the money for free to build my own roads. They're not going to reject the money if they're being given. So the initiative here needs to come from Congress to eliminate all these grants that are coming from the Highway Trust Fund to the states, so the states can actually have the flexibility they need to build their own roads. Because all this money from the Highway Trust Fund has a lot of requirements that are really ridiculous. Like one of the ones I mentioned is that 15% of the money the states receive for roads has to be spent on local bridges that are not even connected to an interstate road. Some states might not even have those bridges that they really need at all to fund, but they're still given that requirement.
Wow. So you kind of mentioned like a little market effect here that maybe people don't often consider. If you want to just raise the gas tax, well, obviously, then people will just keep driving, and then you will make more money that will go into the coffers, of tax revenue to actually fund for these projects and sort of patch those budget shortfalls. But you mentioned that raising the gas tax might just accelerate less people driving and lower gasoline consumption, and therefore tax revenue will fall short. It kind of reminds me of these sort of purists on marijuana legalization, and they make really big promises or whatever on the tax revenue that will come from taxing and legalizing marijuana in your state. But on the local level, cities and towns might not even allow pot stores and marijuana dispensaries to be on their city streets, and therefore people aren't buying the legal marijuana, and then the tax revenue falls short just sort of by those sort of
Yeah.
natural sort of hand of the market sort of thing. Is there any sort of way to get around that? Maybe communicate that to people that this is just going to naturally be what happens, is people are just going to slow down their driving.
So I don't think it is so much that people are slowing down their driving, but that people are just buying more fuel efficient cars. People are richer. The future is going to be electric cars. It's definitely not going to be tomorrow. It's not going to be in 10 years, but progressively and gradually, people are going to buy more electric cars, hybrid cars, and more fuel efficient cars. So as that happens over the long term, there's going to be a lot less gasoline consumption. And this comes from every front. Trucks are more fuel efficient now. Personal cars are more fuel efficient, and when there's nobody else consuming gas, then how are you going to pay for the roads? Now, this many economists and many policymakers are supporting raising the federal gas tax because it is true that it hasn't been raised in a long time. But what people really need to look at, and it's what I talk about in my article, is what this money is being used for. And if we can avoid a tax hike, then we definitely should. And then the state should figure out how to solve this problem, because it is a lot easier for a state such as Florida, like they're currently doing, that they have the Sun Pass. So they fund a lot of roads in this electronic toll system. And that is much
Yeah.
better because no matter how much gas you consume, the only thing that matters is how much you drive, how much you actually use this public resource that is roads.
Yeah. How do you feel about those sort of, those easy pass, toll roads? I lived in Northern Virginia for quite some time. I don't know if you have that at all out in Indiana where you are from. Is that sort of the real ideal though? Like sort of just paying as you go as a system?
That would be the one of the most ideal forms of taxation to fund the roads that economists talk about and have studied, which would be kind of like a toll system in which you pay for as much as you use. But then there's other things that are being tried locally, which is why this federalism approach for roads is really good. For example, LA and I think also Northern Virginia has one of these highways in which, depending on the time of the day when there's like a lot of traffic in the road, they have this lane that you have to pay extra just to be on that lane, so that you can release traffic. Um, so that's one of the options. It's states are actually just trying to implement these things. So there have been a lot of mistakes, but once states get used to this and people get used to it, I think they'll sort it out.
What is the role, if any, of private interests in maintaining infrastructure, transportation options, and keeping the roads in good tact? There's been stories about Domino's Pizza, patching potholes in cities, and this has been, something we've seen with a couple of small, like do-gooder companies as well. Do you think that there is any case to be made for privatization of certain roads, or really allowing and creating more, I guess, legal room for companies to help take care of the roads that their giant 18-wheelers are always running up and down, and
Sure.
helping to wear
Yeah.
out?
Well, one of the most well-known cases of road privatization is the Chicago Skyway, which has been leased since 2006 for 99 years. So until the next century, it will be leased to a private company, and the road is actually making money for the company. It initially didn't make money, and now it's making money.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people complain because of the tolls, but the reality is that this company is allowing the city to keep up, maintain the road much cheaper, because a private company has the incentive to reduce costs as much as possible. Now, cities have to be very careful on how they make these privatization agreements, because if they don't design well those agreements, they can mess up the incentives. So this is another thing that is also on a case by case basis. But of course, I agree. States and cities should privatize as many roads as they can, while they make sure that the incentives are right for the private company to keep up the road and at the same time keep costs down.
All right. Daniel, we will be right back after a short break. I want to talk to you a little bit about what's going on with the government shutdown. Y'all hang with us for just 1 minute. Hey, you. Thanks for listening to Underscored, a podcast brought to you by Young Voices. Hit that subscribe button, and every week let's underscore together what's important this week that you need to know or know more about. You can find out more about Young Voices by going to our website, www.young-voices.com, and on Twitter at YVADV. I look forward to hearing from you. All right, and we're back, and I'm talking to guest Young Voices contributor Daniel DiMartino, coming at us all the way from Spain, finishing up vacation time and visit with family. Daniel, it's nice to have you on still. We've been talking about the roads, who will fund them, the idea that, government funding, it creates or it runs into shortfalls, and then we have to figure out, how we are going to actually have access to good and safe roads in the future. This sort of reminds me, or calls to mind, that we are going through a government shutdown right now, where the federal government has been unable to secure funding to stay open. So we're sort of in a partial shutdown situation where non-essential staff are furloughed, laid off, all that sort of stuff. And, things like state parks are, I'm told, in a state of anarchy. State, national, or national parks, excuse me, are in a state of anarchy, with people, visiting, just throwing their trash everywhere. There's, human feces like piling up in these parks. There are people brawling and fighting over government owned and operated campsites. What a mess. I mean, I think this right here is like the case to be made that all of this stuff just needs to be going on at the state level. Like, why the heck do we even have a national park anyway if the government can't promise that it's going to be open on the weekends? Ridiculous.
Yeah, that's true. At least the Department of Transportation, the Federal Highway Administration specifically, is really not affected by the shutdown, because they receive their money from gas taxes, and they haven't run out of funding yet, because Congress gave them enough funding the last time they bailed them out, and they kept that money in their account, so they can still use that money and they can keep collecting gas taxes. So they'll be fine. Yeah,
Oh, well, thank heavens they can keep
Yeah, they can
collecting
keep collecting taxes,
taxes.
but the IRS can't refund your taxes though during the shutdown. They won't refund you your taxes.
It's really amazing what the government can and cannot do when it is shut down partially. Daniel, what do you think is sort of the way out for this government shutdown that we're in? I mean, it seems to really be all about border security, border wall funding, whatever Donald Trump's pet project on the border is that
Yeah,
he would like to see carried out. The Democrats aren't going to do it. Do you think that there is a road ahead here for reopening the government?
I think that what really hurt Trump's negotiating standpoint was the judge's decision that he can't end the DACA program. I think that that really gave him a lot of negotiating power, and that he would have definitely gotten a deal with the Democrats to legalize people on DACA in exchange for the wall, which would have really been good, because even though the wall wouldn't really be an effective border policy and it would cost a lot of money, it would be really a waste of money. Um, I think it's definitely a good exchange to have a lot of people that should be in the United States working and are contributing to the economy stay there if that's what Trump wants for a wall. Um, but I don't think that, I mean, I think really Trump is unpredictable on this. He might just approve something and then declare victory for nothing. But I don't think the
I
shutdown is
think
going
that's
to last.
probably true, yeah.
Yeah, he might do that at any point. But at the same time, as I said, if the IRS can't give refunds for people's taxes, this is not going to last until mid of the year, because April is coming. People are going to file their taxes by April, and then if they don't get their refunds, that is going to be a big problem for Trump. His popularity.
Yeah. How committed do you think he is to the creation of some sort of big border wall? We've already seen some sort of wordplay going on within the administration about trying to scale back what the definition of a wall is. Do you think he really cares that much about reopening the government within a reasonable amount of time? I think the all-time high for a government shutdown was 21 days in 1995 under Bill Clinton. I see Trump being able to dig in pretty far on this. Republicans have never made a big issue about keeping the government open. It's always been the Democrats' thing that, if the government's not open, we're in a state of anarchy.
Yeah. Given that it's really not a complete government shutdown, and the agencies that are shut are things like the national parks and, well, even the treasury, even though it's relatively important, it's not the whole federal government. It's not the Department of Defense or Homeland Security. So I do think that Trump could keep up the shutdown for a long time, but I really don't think it will go past filing taxes because of the reason of the refunds, unless they reach some sort of deal in which they only fund the IRS. But I don't think there's the willingness to do that. Um, I think it would be good politically for Trump to dig in, because he really made a big promise out of the wall. If he really doesn't deliver, I think a lot of people in his base are going to be very mad with him.
Well, Trump is, if one thing, stubborn. So I think that might work out for him. Daniel DiMartino, thank you so much for joining me on Underscored. Where can people find you on Twitter and get connected with more of your work?
Just like you listen to my name, Daniel DiMartino. So that is Daniel and then DiMartino. That's my Twitter handle, at Daniel DiMartino. And you can find also my website, danieldimartino.com, and you can contact me there.
It's a beautiful website, Daniel.
Thank you. I worked on it a long time, and I took in your suggestions about the titles and the names of the outlets. I put it all. Thank you, by the way.
Well, that's a major game changer. All right, we'll be back next week with more from Underscored. I've been your host, Stephen Kent. You can find me on Twitter at Stephen_Kent89 and Young Voices at YVADV. And we'll be back then. Until then, stay free.